Welcome everyone to today's webinar, meeting the NIST 800, 171 and CMMC Challenge in Higher Education. Today's webinar is being recorded, and everyone who signed up for today's event will receive a link in an email tomorrow afternoon. If you have questions during the webinar, please post them to the Q&A. The chat will be disabled. And with that, I am going to turn the conversation over to today's host and guests. Sanjeev, please take it away.
Thank you very much, Shirley. Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar. We really appreciate the participation of the higher educational community in this webinar today. As we all know, higher education institutions are a key source of research that is vital to national security. It's also abundantly clear that higher education institutions are a prime target for sophisticated attackers, most often nation states. So in response to this threat, there's increased regulation to protect sensitive information. And we are here today to discuss 3 regulatory frameworks designed to protect so-called controlled unclassified information. And those are NIST 800-171, CMMC, and Itar. Our webinar will draw upon 3 very experienced voices that are key to successfully implementing such security and compliance programs within higher education. Please welcome Ms. Katrina Biscay. Katrina is the CISO of, or the Chief Information Security Officer of the University of Cincinnati. She's a highly accomplished CISO and also is a cyber forensics buff. As a CISO, she has a very important voice in implementing compliance programs because compliance programs are fundamentally all about security, a point that's often overlooked when we all fall into the execution mode. Joining us is Ryan Duitman, Program Manager for Regulated Research at the University of Arizona. Ryan's a very experienced execution expert. He's responsible for implementing regulatory programs within the research community at the University of Arizona. And more pertinent to today's discussion, currently Ryan is preparing his organization for CMMC Level 2. So welcome, Ryan. And then finally, from outside the research institutions, an important voice is that of a consultant or an expert that the research community can draw upon. Noelle Vestal is an expert in NIST 800-171, CMMC, and Itar. She is a CMMC AB registered practitioner. She has actually implemented a CMMC program and understands compliance also from her 15 years of experience within the Department of Defense. She's now helping customers using Prevail's cloud, email, and file sharing systems to protect CUI with their compliance journey. So welcome, Noelle. So I'm going to provide at the beginning a very quick update on NIST 800-171 CMMC and Itar programs. So quickly, NIST 800-171 has 110 controls. And these controls and NIST 800-171 are in force if you have a DoD contract, and the DoD contract has a deforest clause in it. So you're required to implement part of the contract, NIST 800-171, and it's 110 controls. And many of you have submitted your compliance with it and your score to the SPRS system. Second, closely aligned with NIST 800-171 is the new CMMC Level 2 or Advanced, which also requires adherence to the same NIST 800-171 controls. And the latest guidance that's emerging from the Department of Defense is to expect an interim rule to be in place in May 2023, which means we are just about a year away from assessments commencing. And then finally, new Itar regulations under section 120.54 point to the future of convergence of security and compliance into simple rules. So Itar rules now clearly specify the criteria for adopting cloud services. Specifically, cloud services may be used for Itar data only if they use end-to-end encryption, FIPS 140-2 to encrypt them, and the cloud providers don't have the ability to decrypt your data. In short, you can use such cloud services with modern zero trust services. So that's a very quick update on what's new with these programs. But to dig deeper into it, my first question is to Noel. Noel, kindly expand upon what you feel are the important updates that you want to provide the higher ed community on NIST 800, CMMC, and ITAR.
Definitely. Thank you, Sanjeev. That was a really good overview. So I'll just fill in the blanks in a couple different places. One thing that has shifted in the past few months with CMMC remains to be seen how it's going to affect the program, but CMMC originally actually came out of Acquisition and Sustainment Department. It is now moved over to the DoD CIO's office as of the first week of February of this year. But that is definitely going to cause some changes and shifts. There was also a crawl, walk, run approach. For any of you who've been around with CMMC for a while, that was the original way. Okay, you're going to crawl with this many contracts are going to have a CMMC clause in it in this year and then more in the next year, et cetera. That is no longer the case. That is a misconception now in the community that I've heard a few times. So like Sanjeev just said, in May of 2023, there will be the final rule, and hopefully by then, and it will come out for all contracts going forward. So it's not going to be that crawl, walk, run approach anymore. It's just going to sort of be everybody at that point. Another thing to consider as well is that they're also, and I'm not sure if this will happen when, what remains to be seen in the next year, but they're trying to sort of combine the DFAR 7012 clause that Sanjeev mentioned, and also the CMMC level 2 together, because at this current point, they're not. You have to kind of do both separately. There has been a lot of discussion of sort of making one DFAR. So there's a DFARS for CMMC, which is DFARS, I think it's 7020. That would actually be the DFARS that everyone would have to adhere to instead of 7012 specifically, and then DFARS 7020 specifically, but it would sort of be a combination of both of them. So those are definitely things that are most likely coming down the pike. I know it seems like it's a really long time for a year, but I will tell you that for myself, when I had to implement this for a small defense contractor, only about 35, 40 employees, it took me 10 months to get that done from start to finish. So I imagine obviously at most of these educational institutions, you're talking about a whole lot more people and a whole lot more resources that are going to have to be in play. So definitely starting now is imperative.
Well, thank you, Noel. Just to underscore the point that Noel made for the DFAR 7012 and 7020. So I mentioned CMMC is 110, same controls that are in NIST. What the DoD is now attempting to do is to say, look, CMMC level 2 will be those 110 controls, plus DFAR 7012, which means that the services that you're using, if they're cloud services, must be FedRAMP baseline moderate equivalent and must comply with forensic data being available through DFAR 7012 C through G, so combining that all into one. So you have to adhere to the 110 controls, plus if you're using a cloud service, FedRAMP baseline moderate equivalent and 7012 C through G. So let's move on to Ryan, who has the unenviable job of executing these programs right now, or maybe it's enviable. Ryan, please tell us, how did you get started on your secure research program? What are the key elements of putting together such a compliance program for a higher educational institution from your perspective?
Great. Thank you, Sanjeev, for that introduction. So the University of Arizona, we realized in late 2015, maybe 2016, early 2016, that the NIST 800-171 controls were going to be required at the end of 2017. And so our university, our senior leadership, got together and formed a committee. That committee consisted of our deputy CIO, our CISO, our Chief Information Security Officer, and a number of other campus stakeholders like our Export Control Office, our Budgeting Office, our sponsored projects. And we had representatives from some of the colleges that would be most affected, namely our engineering and our optical sciences area. And they formed this committee to evaluate the needs for meeting this compliance. And they realized really quickly that there were a number of DoD contracts and contracts with other companies like Raytheon's and Lockheed Martin's of the world, and realized there would be a lot of funding lost if we could not meet those requirements. And so that committee looked at next steps. They've hired my predecessor as a project manager to come in and and manage all of the work that would need to be required. In all, it took about 18 months for my university to meet those requirements. Some of the key elements taken away from this is really support from the senior leadership. It was absolutely critical in order for us to move forward. Without that leadership, it just wouldn't have happened. Funding was really key for this. So not only funding to initially start the program, but funding to continually progress and grow the program. A close relationship with compliance offices. So we have a really close relationship with our export control office and our privacy office, as well as the colleges that are most affected. Technical expertise was also really critical, especially since we were going to deploy in the cloud. We'll talk a little more about that later. And then, of course, the processes and procedures needing to support the compliance was the most complex and time-consuming aspect of becoming compliant. The technology was easy. The rest of it was much more difficult.
Well, thank you very much. And that's, I think, a shared experience. So I want to, underscore this process of, documenting and putting the compliance frameworks together, because we also see the technology adoption is the easier part. The compliance documentation, etc., is harder. So Noel, my question for you is, could you go over what are the essential elements of putting a compliance program together? Please comment on the system security plan, documentation, time to prepare, and also some of the technology platforms, etc. So your take on it.
Certainly. Without a doubt, the documentation I feel is the most complicated. It's the most time consuming. It's the most resource heavy. There are a lot of different organizations, educational, DIB members in the defense industry base. I mean, it's anybody who has to do this compliance. It is a struggle to find someone who is going to be able to manage internally all of that documentation creation and ensure that you are in line with everything you're actually doing. The thing that I've probably said, I don't even know how many times in these webinars, is that an auditor or an assessor is going to examine your documentation. They're going to interview everyone to make sure that that's been habitualized, that everyone understands that that policy exists. And then also they're going to test it. So they're going to need to see that you're actually doing what you're saying. So that's the tricky part right there, is making sure that your policy states or in your procedures state exactly what you are actually doing, so that when the auditor has a conversation with an IT manager or an HR manager, they are saying the same things that are documented, and then also that they can test it and see the same thing as well. So it can be a huge struggle to get all those things in line. And your system security plan, you can't even really start without one, obviously. I mean, you honestly can't. So making sure that that's something that's robust and intuitive, also something easy to understand, that's a tricky part too. You want to be able to make sure that auditors and assessors can find what they need easily. There's been a lot of talk too about having more of a responsibility matrix, which is something that makes it much easier for auditors and assessors who come in, and that's responsibility internally within your organization. So if I'm looking at control 3.3, 3.1.1, I know immediately on that line item in that responsibility matrix who the POC is, who the alternate POC is, where I'm going to get that information, what policies I'm going to look at, what processes, etc. And then obviously having to actually create all that documentation is not an easy undertaking, but those would be the things that I would say the big ticket items, if you will, in documentation that are going to help immensely and save some money and time.
So Noel, just a follow-up question, while many in the audience probably understand what a system security plan is, could you expand upon, for the broader audience, what is an SSP and why is this an important element of any compliance program for CMMC NIST 800-171?
Absolutely. I would actually even go farther to say that an SSP, a system security plan, is imperative for really every organization, regardless of whether or not you're doing compliance. It is the overarching understanding of how your system's security is operating, what your network looks like, what kind of procedures are in place to keep your information safe, where does it stay safe? What are the procedures, for example, if you have a spillage of some kind of sensitive data? It really is a holistic view of your entire security operations for your entire organization. It's one of the most important documents you're going to have in your company, honestly, and definitely the most important one for your security planning.
And this is the document that is the basis for an assessment. So when you are being audited, the system security plan lists the controls, how you're complying with it, and this is how you sort of engage with the auditors and assessors. Is that a correct way to look at the system security plan?
Yeah, definitely. It's sort of the key to the gate, if you will. This is where the assessors are going to start. This is the key they look at first, saying, okay, well, there's this policy here about access control or this procedure about access control. Well, what other information is going to be with that? Is there an asset inventory list that I can look at? Is there an account list of everyone who has privileged access that I can look at? Your system security plan will direct them to all of that additional documentation as well. So it really is sort of the key to the kingdom, definitely, when you're talking about an assessment.
Thank you. So speaking of system security, moving over to Katrina. Katrina, there's disparate research groups within a university, their offices of research. So can you share your experience on how researchers and Office of Research help the security organization better understand what they do so that the appropriate security measures can be put in place and incorporated into an appropriate compliance and system security plan?
Absolutely. You're absolutely right. Traditionally, research and enterprise information security have not participated together on initiatives and have not spoken to each other in many institutions. So really, we want to be a trusted partner for the Office of Research. We realize that this is a critical mission for the university, and we want to support that. So a lot of the times, or in the past at our institution, we were engaged only when a problem surfaced. There was a negative event of some sort, or they wanted us to sign off on a technology control plan, or a PI could not fulfill a specific requirement. It did not have the documentation. That was very inefficient. And it resulted in a lot of unpleasant surprises, both for enterprise security and for the PIs and the Office of Research. So really, ongoing communication is the key to solving this. We want to know about the project. Engage us early. Tell us what you're doing. What are the goals? What type of technology is involved? What are you concerned about? Because a lot of the times the PI really has a good understanding of where they're going with their research initiatives, what type of technology will be present, and some of the basic security controls as part of their environment. We can fill in the gaps if we know that the project is happening early. And frankly, enterprise security is not very educated typically on the specifics of sponsored research. One of the best experiences I personally had was writing an NSF grant proposal, because it quickly educated me on the language, the process, the complexity of the sponsored research. And it also gave me the opportunity to meet the right people on the research side that I have not normally would have interacted with. We developed relationships that we still have to this day, and we've been very successful in keeping those lines of communication open.
It's always helpful because it just puts in place a good understanding that what we're talking about is essentially a complex but a cross-functional effort between the research community and the Office of the Chief of Information Security Officer. So Ryan, moving on again to the nuts and bolts of it, you've been implementing your secure research program. Let's go into it step by step. How much time did it take to create your secure research program? And how many people and resources do you have for your secure research program?
Great. Yeah, absolutely. So the short answer is it took us about 18 months to get our program together. And that consisted initially with a part-time technical person. He was actually our manager for our high performance computing environments, but he's highly intelligent. And so he really helped us get started on the technology side. And we had a full-time project manager. Later, we added a security analyst to the team. And then after a little while, we added 2 full-time technical staff to help on the technical side. So currently, our program has 5 full-time staff members, 2 technical, actually we have 4, sorry, take that back. There's 4, 2 full-time, myself and a security analyst. And then the manager of our HPC also does some help with us too on a part-time basis. We are looking at adding some additional resources to help us with our CMMC compliance. So we're bringing in some temporary help for that as well. But we also, part of our program leverages our campus units. So we work really closely with a couple of department IT managers in the College of Engineering and Optical Sciences who help us with our program. And then we also work, as I said earlier, work really close with our export control office and leaders from our research administration office in support of our program.
So, to underscore, I think the export control office is dealing with Itar regulations, people and data that you're holding that is subject to Itar. That's interesting. So I think switching over from the practitioner to the CISO's perspective, Katrina, what does a shared responsibility security model look like from your vantage point? And who at the institution should be engaged in the research security conversations so that they all sort of dovetail into a successful security and compliance program?
The shared responsibility model, well, it really depends on the nature of your particular institutional environment. Some institutions are very distributed technologically. They may have IT units in every college, multiple central IT organizations. Some are much more centralized. It's easier with the centralized organizations to develop those shared responsibility models because the bulk will really fall on enterprise IT and can be documented and managed appropriately. With distributed institutions, and we are one of those, it is really a lot more difficult. You really need the buy-in and the participation from the individual units, the IT managers and the deans, because they ultimately carry the business risk associated with any non-compliance. So what we've done is we picked a standard framework. For us, it's NIST 800-171, which I think is pretty common now as a standard higher ed network in use. And we evaluated our both enterprise and local college controls in our partner colleges against that framework. And we documented who handles what area and has that responsibility, just as Noel mentioned, created that matrix that outlines the shared responsibility model. And really after that, the next step is creating some formal agreements and SLAs between the centralized IT units and the colleges. That document is something you can point to and show the auditors. And it's a long process. I will be honest with you. It takes a little while to line up all of the paperwork and get the correct signatures. But at the end, it really produces a nice package that you're able to share and duplicate once a new college comes on board with a sponsored project with security clauses. We've included a number of participants on our campus. We actually have a NIST Compliance Steering Committee, which is a multidisciplinary group. It is sponsored by the VP of Research and our Chief Digital Officer. And it has both the academic side and the administrative side. They set priorities for what projects are going to be funded and initiated next, because with 110 controls, there's a lot to do. And this has to be done in a lot of cases at an institutional level. We have representation from the Office of Research Compliance, the Office of Research Ethics. We have an individual embedded in the Office of Research that is a cybersecurity specialist that works directly with the PIs. We have privacy, expert control, and legal. And they're really some of our closest partners that get pulled in whenever their expertise or view is necessary.
Well, thank you. Very helpful. So Katrina, you mentioned that there's 110 controls, and it was shared earlier that they need to be documented thoroughly in a system security plan. And this is a big undertaking. But so far we've been talking about, the compliance aspect of it. But underlying all this documentation has to be the fundamental purpose of these programs, which is to protect the controlled unclassified information. And cloud services are now emerging that can help both with the security and compliance. So clearly, they offer a good way to store and share, CUI, but they can also help simplify the implementation of NIST, CMMC, and Itar, because in essence, the cloud service itself sort of implements the controls, and those controls can be in some way, shape, or form be inherited by the organization. So they have a key role to play in the implementation or simplification of the implementation of CMMC, NIST, and Itar programs. So moving over to the use of cloud, Ryan, as a practitioner, did you leverage cloud service providers for your solution? Did they provide any assistance in terms of the development of your solution and documentation, etc.? And why did you choose the cloud providers that you chose for your solution?
Yeah, great. Thank you, Sanjeev. At the University of Arizona, we do utilize Amazon Web Services, particularly GovCloud, for our deployment of our services. Platforms like AWS GovCloud or Azure Government, these providers provide for a lot of the security controls that are required as part of the NIST 800-171 and some other security controls. So one of the things that these providers provide you is a list of all the areas that they cover on your behalf. As part of our evaluation, we evaluated whether or not we could deploy on-prem or whether we should use cloud services, realizing all the physical security controls that were required. And also at the University of Arizona, we were making a movement for our enterprise applications to move to AWS. So we were already on a committed path to cloud services. And so it made natural sense for our university to move or to deploy our AWS or our NIST 800-171 environments in AWS. But I think it's again, as Katrina said, it really depends on your organization. Our organization was moving to the cloud. It made perfect sense for us to move there. The temporary nature of these projects, they come on, they come off, new ones come in, projects close. It just made real sense with the flexibility and the agility of cloud to move in that direction. But with AWS, of course, it's a shared responsibility. They handle the physical security side of the house. We handle all of the other components. Services like AWS and Azure Government make it easier for us because they provide lots of tools to deploy these services in secure manners. And so for us, it made perfect sense to move to the cloud.
You're riding a secular trend over here. So to get, again, Katrina, your perspective, how do you view the role of cloud services from a security and compliance perspective?
Well, I mean, cloud is a friend and foe, right? It makes some things easier and some things more difficult. We have traditionally been on-prem heavy, so venturing into the cloud was a little bit of a challenge for us. We've had individual researchers that were interested in utilizing cloud services, but the enterprise approach specifically to support research really wasn't there. That's shifting very quickly for us. We primarily focused on AWS and Microsoft Azure as the two cloud platforms for compliant environments. And where we're spending a lot of our attentions are on a self-service model for our researchers to be able to spin up workloads in a safe, secure, and consistent manner. So right now, a lot of our attention is focused on building out guardrails that are consistent between the two clouds, as well as a self-service portal that will allow the researchers to log in, spin up a workload, stay safe and secure, and then spin it down when they're complete with it. It will also allow them to migrate workloads between the two clouds because some of them do have that need. And then another initiative that we currently have in place is the encrypted secure communications. So we've had on-prem Exchange servers for most of our ITAR compliant work, and that was segregated from our production email and storage environment. That's extremely inconvenient. Our researchers complained quite a bit about it. They did not like using two separate email environments. They can only access one on-prem and one on their phone. So there was a lot of difficulty, and we heard them. We gathered a lot of their feedback. So our current initiative is to spin up both an email and storage environment that is ITAR compliant, and actually Prevail is our partner in that. To ensure that our researchers can stay secure and compliant with ITAR and not have multiple areas where they check their communications or use for storage and collaboration.
Thank you, Katrina. I want to thank you for choosing us, but I want to expand upon and link what both you and Ryan said about the use of AWS, Gov, and Azure as platforms, and then what role does like an organization like Prevail play? So obviously, you inherit controls and a basic cloud environment with AWS, Gov, or Azure. But as Katrina mentioned, researchers and other users are going to be storing files on their computers, sharing them, accessing them on their phones, sending emails from their existing systems like Office 365 or G Suite or Exchange, whatever it may be. And so systems like Prevail basically sit on top of AWS GovCloud and integrate into your Office 365 and G Suite, etc., so that you can send emails from there. You can have the same folders that you've got to go and store and share data. And now you inherit even more compliance frameworks by the use of these sort of higher level applications. So I'm going to, having linked those things, I'm going to go to Noelle and ask for her views on, how does Prevail, assist with both security and compliance, and how does it integrate with the existing systems, and additional help that's provided in terms of documentation and controls from a compliance perspective.
Sure, certainly. One of the things that I think is the most amazing about Prevail is that it is sort of a bolt-on option. It's not something that's going to affect the business processes you already have and the technologies you already have. If you are a 365 shop commercial, Prevail adds on to that. It does not change what you're already using and what your users are already using, which is really the key. So Katrina was mentioning how, you had researchers with multiple different locations to look at things, and that's just not user friendly. Prevail makes it so there's a single point to be able to access those communications, those secure communications, as well as those files securely from, a mobile platform, a device platform, the web platform as well. So you have that communication across the board, and it is end-to-end encrypted and zero trust, which is what you're looking for, especially with CUI and ITAR data. So that would be the biggest thing that I can start with talking why Prevail is such a good solution, because it doesn't affect what you already have. Excuse me. The other thing that we have at Prevail is documentation templates. So we have an SSP template, we have a POAM template, we have policy procedural templates to sort of give you that leg up, if you will, because as we talked about in the beginning, documentation is definitely the biggest lift, without a doubt, for anybody who's starting out on their CMMC or NIST 800-171 journey. That compliance documentation is a bear. So having anybody who can sort of give you, that little leg up, it's definitely advantageous. And at Prevail, we've worked really hard to make sure that documentation is very robust and super useful to anybody who's starting their compliance journey, regardless of whether or not they're in the DoD space, directly as contractors, or in the research and development space, education space as well.
And Noelle, just a quick follow-up. I mean, in terms of the perspective of, there's 110 controls, how many, does the documentation, cover, and how much can an organization expect to inherit in terms of the numbers of controls? And have any customers actually gone through an assessment, and what were your key learnings and results from that?
Definitely. Well, to answer your first question, Prevail supports 86 out of the 110 controls. So that's with our documentation. Obviously, no technological solution is going to be able to support anything by itself, because as we all know, every single one of these is going to have some kind of documentation with it. I wish there was an easy button we could all push, right? And not be able to have to do the internal work, but unfortunately that's not the case. To the follow-up question that you asked about whether or not we have had anyone at Prevail, any of our customers go through an audit. We have actually, we've had 2 different customers who've gone through audits. The most recent one actually went through the CMMC 2.0. And it was definitely very enlightening. One of the big things that I think we all kind of took away from it was how every single security asset has to be FIPS 140-2 compliant. That was something that our customer didn't realize about their firewall. It's something they had an encryption on it. They thought it was enough, and it wasn't. It had to be FIPS 140-2. So that's one of the other advantages of Prevail. Obviously, we are FIPS 140-2. That certification is there. Those auditors asked for that certification from us. They needed to see that from NIST. So that's something to really think about. It can't just say, yes, no, we know that we would be compliant. It has to be, you have to be able to show them that certification. That was a really big takeaway that kind of surprised all of us a little bit, but I'm glad that we had everything the way we needed it.
Thank you, Noel. Let's get back to, Ryan, who's in the midst of, implementing these, gnarly programs, and the aspect of funding for these. Economics and are an important aspect of it. So question for you is, how do you fund your secure research program? And what's the business model, if I may, for your secure research program? And how do you support your secure research program? So walk us through the various phases of it.
Perfect. Yeah. So initially, our program, like a lot of programs at universities, was funded with some temporary funding. And that temporary funding was secured. We use the word temporary, but it was temporarily funded for 5 years, right? But after the initial 1.5 or 2 years or so, the success of the program led to more permanent centralized funding for all of the support services, all the program pieces, the compliance, the technology, the support, that side of the house. But we also had this AWS component. And so part of our business model is working with researchers and departments on including the costs, the AWS costs in particular, in those funding grants and those funding opportunities. And so with that, our support model consists of a couple of different aspects. One of it is that we work with these departments. We work with their finance offices. We work with their technology offices in support of the program. Our central IT unit, as Katrina mentioned, provides a majority of the support. We provide all the cloud support, all the cloud engineering that went into place, all the maintenance of the virtualized environments that are deployed on behalf of researchers. Our local IT shops, we partner with them. They do a lot of the in-person support. They know their researchers better than we do. They know their workflows, and so we partner with them on that aspect. I failed to mention as well that our central unit, we also have a laptop loaner program that we have for researchers to check out a compliant laptop for this research. Those local IT shops help support those laptops. Mentioned this a couple of times, and we mentioned how important it is, but we do partner on the support side with our export control office, and also with sponsored projects from a contracting perspective of NIST 800-171. And then our export control office, we partner with them on onboarding new projects, offboarding projects, annual assessments, reviews of the projects. We do an annual review with each project, see how they're doing. And so our export control office really helps as part of that support program.
So moving on, let's talk about, we've spoken about, how to make things simpler, use cloud services, use documentation provided by cloud services to help simplify your documentation efforts, use systems that integrate with your existing workflows to make sure that CUI can be transported, stored, shared, just as researchers are used to. So those are things that are helping the compliance efforts. But let's talk about the difficulties as well that you are continuing to face. So we don't want to underestimate, that these are complex programs. What's the most difficult part of your secure research program? And tell us what's the current phase of your compliance effort? Where are you right now? And how do you expect to get to being ready? And it's only 12 months more to go. I mean, that's the thing that people don't realize, that this is not an undertaking that can be done in a sprint. So your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a couple of pretty big difficulties. One of them is just determining what is CUI and what isn't. Oftentimes these contracts come down and they just flow the 800.171 down, and we've responded back saying what actually is CUI, and a lot of the sponsors can't tell us. And so at the University of Arizona, we take a more conservative approach in those cases. We just protect everything as
That's
if
correct.
it was CUI.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a problem. Researchers are like, why do I have to protect this? It's because it's a flow down. We have to do this. So that's been a difficulty we've had. Another one has been just associated with different, new technologies. Researchers have different workflows. When we initially developed our program, we had a certain set of workflows that we were working with. Those change over time. We're actually seeing now a growing need for high performance computing. High performance computing in the cloud is awfully expensive. But on-prem, it's really hard to determine like what is the appropriate size for that, so we don't have unused capacity. So that's been a difficult piece as well. And then back to this idea of including costs in funding proposals. That's been a difficult nut for us to crack. We think we have a new approach that we're testing out. We thought about and we talked about characteristics of projects that might contain this, because oftentimes when you're going for one of these projects, you don't know if it's going to be CUI or not. We don't often find that out until after the contract has been sent back and ready for signing. And so we've built into this process, these are things to look for that might contain it. And so let's put some costs associated. So jury's still out on how that's going to work. Hopefully it works. And if it does, we'll share that model with others. As far as, where we are right now, we started an effort about 6 or 8 months ago, an outreach program with our researchers to find out what it is that they need. What do they see coming down the road? They're the ones that are out there on the forefront. They're the ones that are going for these grants. What do you see, and how can we make our program easier? And so with that data, one of the things that we are right now, we've launched a pilot for secure communication services. These include secure messaging, email. Again, like Katrina, we've partnered with Prevail for that. And then video conferencing as another big one that we've heard a lot of need for that. So those are 2 services. We're in pilots right now with those 2 programs. But we're also looking at other ways to easier ways to share files. We do have a system in place for that. It's a little cumbersome. So we're looking for easier ways to share services. We're also looking at using security tokens as an additional multi-factor mechanism. We're finding some projects now have additional securities that say you can't have a phone in the room where CUI is being discussed. Traditionally, we're using phones for our 2-factor authentication. So now we're looking at YubiKeys as a possibility there. And then, overall, we're looking at just like you had said, Sanjeev, just making it easier to access these resources. Sometimes there's multiple jumps we have to do to reach the cloud. And so trying to find ways to make that easier. So those are our big initiatives at this point.
Oh, we appreciate that. And I think our own, mantra over here is just all about, the highest grade of security, relying on modern end-to-end encryption and just making it all simple. So, going back to Katrina, as we start concluding the webinar, I'll appreciate any concluding remarks that you have on security and in compliance that you'd like to share with the audience.
I think Ryan hit on a very important point that I'd like to emphasize as well. You have to make it easy. Because if you make security difficult, your community is not going to participate. So it has to be user-friendly. It has to be accessible. They need to know who to call if they have a problem or a question. And frankly, training your staff in customer service is also critical. That's been a huge push for us in the Enterprise Information Security Department is, look, we are a customer service department. I want every conversation to end with our customers saying, wow, that was easy. That's the goal. So we are structuring our plans for compliance and for new technology and for these sponsored research projects with that in mind. We want to remove the burden from the researchers and give it to the people that that can go through the technical documentation, that are used to writing it, that are used to reading the NIST controls and know what those words mean, because that's not what the researcher is for. They are focused on their particular specialty in their work. So making it as simple as possible for them, providing that outreach and education in 1-minute videos, even something that they can just quickly look at, get their answer and move on.
Thank you. Moving over to you, Ryan, any concluding thoughts, important sage advice that you have accumulated through the battle scars that you have accumulated that could be helpful to the higher education community watching this webinar?
Yeah, I would say, just echoing, partner with all the people that are involved with this. Stay close to your expert control office. Stay really close with your researchers. They know what's going on. They're the ones that are using the system every day. Reach out to them, get feedback from them, and apply that feedback as much as you can. We know we have to be compliant, but we still have to make this easy to use. And so stay close to your researchers.
And then finally, over to Noel, any sort of overall concluding points and summary of, how is it that, folks like ourselves that are outside the higher education institution can make life easier for Ryan and Katrina and researchers more broadly within a higher education institution?
Definitely. I think that, like you said, because we are kind of outside of the higher education, but we are very much into the DoD itself. I myself worked for the DoD for more than 15 years. So that is the advantage that we kind of bring to the table, since, one of the things that Katrina, when you said, I want it to be easy for everybody, I want them to get off the phone and say that was easy. Like you said, the researchers are not the people you want to have reading the NIST controls and reviewing the CMMC level 2. It needs to be people who have an understanding of the DoD and also of security. So I think that's one of the really big takeaways about a company like us at Prevail. We have that experience and we can answer those questions in a way that's going to be hopefully very helpful to everybody in higher ed.
Well, thank you all for your participation over here. What I would like to do is to offer up several questions that have come up about the webinar being available, when it's going to be available, etc. We will, I believe, send out emails with a link to the recording of the webinar, and that should go out, within 24 hours. We also want to point out, certain resources that are available. There have been questions that are asked about what resources are available for you to have follow-on questions. There are some questions on Prevail. We don't want to go into, all the questions and answering them about Prevail in this. But what we will do is, with the email will come an ability for you to have a 15-minute, session with Noel. You can book some time with her, get your questions on either Prevail or not Prevail, but just generally, if you want to get the benefit of her experience in general compliance. We encourage you to, have that 15-minute consult. I think you'll find that, helpful. And, we will also, I think, be putting up, I think, Orly shortly. Katrina and Ryan have been very, I would say, generous with making their contact information available. So for those that are interested in, having a few questions answered by them, we don't want you to bombard them, but a few, thoughtful dialogues with Ryan and Katrina. Please kindly, go and feel free to reach out. So I think those are our concluding remarks. And with that, I think we go to taking just a few questions from the audience. Let's go and take a question from Gordon Greenwald. How does defining a SSP differ from documenting security policies and standards? How can policies and standards be leveraged to develop an SSP? I think this is a great question, and I'll direct it to Noel and Ryan to kindly go a little bit deeper into the SSP and what it takes to develop one and answer, Gordon's questions.
Well, sure. Yeah, I'll take a stab at it. I would say that policies and procedures, the SSP is sort of, think of it again, like I mentioned before, this is the key for an assessor or an auditor. If you have existing procedures and policies, that's fantastic. They just need to be included in that SSP in that single document space. The idea being that if an auditor and assessor comes to look for your access control policy or access control procedures for 3.1.1 as an example, just throwing that out there, they need to be able to see all of those things in one place. And the SSP is really the best place to do that. So you can get that overarching understanding. And again, the one thing that I've said a lot is actually that for an auditor, you're telling them a story. So the SSP is sort of the book you're reading. You want to tell that narrative. Okay, well, I see that this access control 3.1.1. Okay, I see that there are policies and procedures. Those are located over here. All right, I will go look at those. There might be additional policies and procedures written in the SSP. They could actually just be directing people to different areas. It's really up to you, whatever works best for your organization. So Ryan, I'll definitely let you say anything you think on that as well.
No, I would totally agree with you. If you have existing policies and procedures, link to those. You will have to show like how, evidence that you're complying with those things. So be sure you collect that evidence as well. The way we have ours organized is we took and followed the NIST 853, right? And we did all those 17 families. We have standards written for all of those. And then we have links to all of the control procedures that match up with the NIST 800-171. And in there, we also reference additional policies as well. But all of this is linked together. It's all in one place, easy to follow.
Excellent. Any thoughts from your side, Katrina, on any of these questions that are asked?
We did a gap analysis of our policies as part of our annual review against NIST 800-171. That was very, very useful for us because it immediately pointed out areas where we did not have documentation in place. So we created a separate NIST COI standard document that summarized the gaps in the required controls. And then from there, we worked on the individual standards and recommendations for things like endpoints, servers, etc.
Great. Let's look at some more questions. There's a question. Do you have a system security plan for sharing, or do you consider it private? Again, Noel, can you answer, how one can get a sense for the system security plan documentation and how we support it, etc.?
Sure, certainly. So at Prevail, we do have a documentation package. I mentioned this earlier that is available to our customers. It is a separate cost because there is quite a bit of documentation that is inside of that. Like I mentioned earlier, our SSP template is very much sort of a step-by-step on what to put where and, examples of things and that sort of stuff. So it's much more robust than the standard template you might be able to Google and look at. Also, we have our own customer responsibility matrix. We have a responsibility matrix within that as well, which means the internal responsibility matrix that we've all kind of discussed over the course of this conversation, and also a POEM template to get you sort of, the rest of the way. That the controls that we do not have anything to do with at Prevail. Like, for example, I think Katrina just mentioned endpoint management. Obviously, we are not going to manage your endpoint. So that would be one of the examples of the control that you would have to have a POEM item for. And so we have that as a template as well. So those are available. Like Sanjeev mentioned, there will be an email going out tomorrow with a copy of this webinar, and also the opportunity to book time with me. I'm happy to answer those types of questions more in depth in those conversations.
Well, thank you, Noel. So I would just, again, re-emphasize for further clarity that, if you're using Prevail, you can certainly get the full documentation set that covers the 86 odd controls that Noel was addressing. And then the remaining 26 or 24 controls, we have a POEM that, or program of actions and milestones, that we will provide you to help you with the process. In terms of those that want to get a sense for the documentation, we'll guide you to our website. There's a CMMC white paper, and that has a mini version of all the controls that we meet and how we meet them, and you can download that for free. So with that, I think we're coming to the top of the hour. I want to sincerely thank our distinguished panel over here. Katrina, thank you so very much for participating and for your thoughtful comments and perspectives as a CISO. Ryan, my sympathies for all the trouble that you're going through, but I also hope that this is, others are benefiting and can benefit from your experience. And so I'm deeply appreciative and thankful to you for that. And thank you, Noel, for your perspectives and for helping the community make the task of compliance simpler, and for Orly to put this program together. Thank you also very much for your kind participation, and have a wonderful afternoon. And we look forward to sharing the email with all the follow-ups with you.